Mi nombre es Berta Cáceres Flores y soy de una organización que se llama Consejo Cívico de Organizaciones Populares e Indígenas de Honduras, COPIN, y somos del pueblo Lenca. Estamos en un proceso de lucha, de activismo por la defensa de los derechos de los pueblos indígenas.
Señorita May's Mayan princess turned radical revolutionary indigenous warrior. A girl who enjoyed playing football, putting on plays, and bossing other kids around, grew into a strong, young, rebellious woman who loved to dance and break the rules. Naturally, she joined the FMLN right after giving birth to her first child at 18 years old. Her takeaway from this experience? One of enlightenment, especially when it came to violence. Berta Cáceres came to the realization that violence was a destructive force that she did not want to bring back to the revolutionary movements of Honduras from El Salvador. Instead, Berta Cáceres and her husband Salvador combined revolutionary forces and found COPIN, a mode of empowerment for the Lenca people, a force in favor of human rights, indigenous rights, and demilitarization. The COPIN strategy was a nonviolent one. They employed direct action by organizing roadblocks, sit-ins, human barricades, and continuous protests. Berta Cáceres was a threat to the status quo, a force against capitalism and elitism in Honduras, and arguably across the world. With this said, she, nor COPIN, were violent threats to the military, government, or elite families of Honduras. In fact, the Pope met the indigenous warrior and shook her hand. Despite her fervent call for peaceful protests, her respect, and even friendship with those who she disagreed with politically, her life was still threatened. And then taken. Why? Berta Cáceres was staying at Utopia, COPIN's training center in La Esperanza. On March 2nd, 2016, she messaged her youngest child, Laura, and told her not to worry. She called her colleague, Chavaria, and told him to visit because she had something important to say to him. She sent School of America watches Bridget Ginther a similar message. With a fellow environmentalist, Gustavo Castro, Berta left to visit her mother and then went out for dinner. After returning, Berta's fears were realized. A struggle ensued. Berta fought as she had for her entire life before this. Then, before leaving, the gunman stamped on her body until there was no sign of resistance. Gustavo shot, heard Berta calling for him. He crawled to her, held her, and begged for her to live. Her last words were, "Get my phone on the table. Call Salvador. Call Salvador." The state and elites of Honduras conspired to assassinate this indigenous warrior as a response to the momentum she was capable of inspiring in indigenous defiance. The cited dispute at the trial against the perpetrators who assassinated Cáceres, and in general discourse, is that of the Gualcarque River. Desarrollos Energéticas, or DESA for short, is a business created solely to execute the Aguas Arca Dam project in the Gualcarque River. DESA managed to acquire a license to build the Aguas Arca Dam. They also received a construction permit from the mayor's office despite a town hall meeting, exemplifying the dissent of the community to the project, where the population voted 401-7 against the dam. This license and permit, however, is not enough. The Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention, or ILO 169, is a treaty available to be ratified globally, which has been signed and ratified by 23 countries, including Honduras. ILO 169 requires that indigenous communities, such as Rio Blanco's Lenca, are not only informed of such projects such as the Aguas Arca Dam, but also their consent must be unequivocally granted. DESA continued to push for the construction of the dam without the free, prior, and informed consent of the Lenca or Rio Blanco community living in the area. I spoke to Noemi Espinoza, who is an amazing person, who is Honduran and has worked with the UN for 20 years as a Honduras Deputy Ambassador, as an employee for the UN Population Fund, as the Secretary General's Envoy for Youth, and as an employee for the President of the General Assembly. She gave me an international law insight into the Honduran and international studies issue of the assassination of Cáceres.
The problem with the UN is that it can't enforce any of these things. So even if a country is signatory to an agreement, like if they don't enforce it or if they don't follow it, even if it's a convention, then nothing happens. And that's across the board. When there's a corrupt government, like the one that we had in Honduras, then they can not fulfill their international agreements and nothing happens.
There is a refusal to consult the indigenous communities. Instead, companies attempt to socialize them. This means going into communities and educating them on the benefits of projects and then profiling influential community members and using them to convince others to defend the projects. Copin and Berta Cáceres were not having this. More importantly, the Rio Blanco community was not having this. Berta Cáceres, after finding out that the Aguas Arca Dam was being supported by a Honduran elite family, the Atalas, and that the head of the security were U.S.-trained former Honduran military officers, she approached the people to confirm their intentions. She asked the community during a meeting, "Are you sure you want to fight this project? I will fight alongside you until the end, but are you, the community, prepared for the struggle that will take years?" A sea of hands rose in the air as the crowd voted to dissent the dam. On May 23, 2013, Berta and Tomás Gómez Membreno, her right-hand man, were stopped at 2 military checkpoints on their way to Rio Blanco for a community meeting regarding the Aguas Arca project. Berta was arrested at the second checkpoint for possession of a weapon which was allegedly found in her boot. Tomás was released after 1 a.m., while Berta was forced to stay in the Santa Barbara police station. 4 months later, on September 20th, Berta and 2 other Copin members, Tomás Gómez and Lito Molina, were presented with arrest warrants for trespassing and inciting the Rio Blanco community to oppose the construction of Aguas Arca after heavy machinery owned by DESA was set on fire. The judge presiding over the case granted bail to both the men, while simultaneously sentencing Berta to jail without the possibility of bail. Later, a text message would surface on July 19, 2013, written by DESA's financial manager, Daniel Atala. It read, "I spent a lot of money and political capital for those 3 arrest warrants. These run-ins with the elite and the justice system exemplify the particular mistreatment of Berta Cáceres as an indigenous woman in organizing." When Berta began using her voice for the empowerment of indigenous people, women, and the environment, her existence became a threat, enough to be criminalized. The 2 men were granted freedom through bail, while the sole indigenous woman was sentenced. This was not justice, this was an example that the state wished to make of Berta. If you step out of line as an indigenous woman, this is what happens to you. DESA took this one step further and plotted to reaffirm their strength as elites through murder. The initial investigation into the assassination of Cáceres was wrought with redirection and refusal to recognize the culpability of DESA and other elites. Rather, Tomás Gómez, Lilian Lopez, and Lito Molina were all considered as suspects for the murder and interrogated for hours. The murder, the investigators purported, was a crime of passion. However, thanks to the non-stop demands for justice worldwide from Berta's family, the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights picked up the case and proposed a team to officially investigate the assassination. Under pressure, the Honduran government declined the IACHR's efforts. At this point, however, the investigators had no choice but to admit this crime to be not one of personal passion, but rather of systemic silencing. 7 men were arrested and put on trial. Douglas Bustillo, Sergio Rodriguez, Edison Duarte Meza, Mariano Diaz, Elvin Apalo Orellana, Henry Javier Hernandez, and Oscar Aroldo Torres. Before the trial of these 7 occurred in Honduras, Berta's family commissioned a group of international lawyers to investigate the case. These lawyers found multiple irregularities in Honduras's investigation, and probable masterminds who have not been apprehended for the assassination. Upon handing over their findings, Honduran authorities were forced to reckon with the publication of the 3 alleged masterminds: Daniel Atala, David Castillo, and Jorge Avila. None of these men were arrested for the crime initially. Eventually, David Castillo was arrested, tried, and convicted for his involvement in the murder. The other 2 men are still free. Before the official arguments even began, the appeals court read and ruled on a petition filed by Cáceres' family lawyers to recuse the judges. The judges overseeing the trial were accused of a long list of malpractice. The petition was denied. The trial reconvened. The family lawyers explained in a submitted written argument that they would appeal the decision before the Constitutional Court. The judges accepted the constitutional challenge, but ruled that the trial would continue the following day without representation for the victims. The judges made the argument that by not showing up in court, the lawyers had abandoned the trial. The victims would be represented instead by public prosecutors. Many of Berta's friends and family boycotted the trial as a result of this unprecedented denial of chosen representation. The trial was wrought by expert testimony that was indiscernible to the layperson, offensive interrogations of witnesses who were close to Berta, and mishandled evidence or entirely missing evidence. The case against the defendants was not seemingly successful in trial initially. That is, until the phone records were brought forth. The state's evidence was based on phone records, not just any phone records, those extracted from Daniel Atala's iPhone 5. Brenda Barahona, the expert on the phone records, testified for almost a week. The ultimate findings proved the presence of the alleged 5 hitmen at Utopia the night of the assassination, along with their combined whereabouts after the murder. The culpability of the other 2 defendants were shown in their shared messages amongst one another and those sent to and from Daniel Atala, who notably was not on trial and still has not faced punishment for his involvement. This evidence was sufficient enough to the judges overseeing the trials to consider the defendants culpable. The 7 men were found guilty of murdering or conspiring to murder the indigenous warrior, Berta Cáceres. Berta Cáceres, the judge said, was killed because of her leadership in the opposition to Aguasarca, which was costing DESA money. Despite this, DESA as a company is still active in Honduras, and DESA is still pushing to build the Aguasarca Dam. This ultimately brings us to the question that was proposed at the beginning of Nina Lakhani's book. Could there ever be justice for someone like Berta in a country like Honduras, where impunity runs supreme? Noemi Espinoza, once more, weighs in.
Countries don't. It's wonderful that the framework exists, but there's really no accountability about it. So I think that's another place where the UN needs to change. And I mean, in the case of Honduras, but in any country. And I think maybe not to put the burden, but maybe younger generations who have aware of you have more access to know what's happening. So the legal system is extremely corrupt, and there's a lot of impunity. But again, that's a thing that can change with the right political will and the right political power.
Yeah. The perspective that I have noted throughout this research is one of hope, as Noemi describes. Berta Cáceres made a similar point during an interview about the Gualcarque River and Copín. I leave this with her.
Tuvimos un debate alrededor de eso, mujeres de diferentes partes del país, y bueno, un compartir desde la alegría también, porque si hay algo que nosotros sabemos después del golpe de Estado, es que si nosotros no tenemos alegría en esto, entusiasmo y esperanza, estamos, como decimos nosotros, muertas en vida.